Welcome to Model 13, Rice 101, Model 13. My name's Griffiths Atungulu. I'm the director of Arkansas Rice Processing Program. I'm an associate professor and agricultural engineer. My area of specialty is in grain processing and post-harvest systems engineering. Housed in the Department of Food Science with the University of Arkansas System, Division of Agriculture. In this module number 13, we are going to cover grading standards for rough rice, brown rice, and milled rice. And the content of this module is going to span from definition of some of the terminologies. We're going to talk about grades, how they're described, some of the grade requirements, and then grade designations. We are going to go through a series of definitions. And to start with, let's define what rough rice is from a grading standpoint. This is rice which consists about 50% or more of paddy kernels. We want to describe what paddy kernels are. These are whole or broken and hard kernels of rice, or whole or broken kernels of brown rice, whole or broken kernels of milled rice, typically having a portion of the hull remaining on these kernels, and that should be about 1/8 or more of the whole or the broken kernel. Now, there are about 4 classes of rough rice from a grading standpoint. You have long grain rough rice, you have medium grain rough rice, short grain rough rice, mixed rough rice. And for purposes of standards, these classifications are based on the percentage of whole kernels, large broken kernels, or other types of kernels, as we're going to see in subsequent slides. Now, from a definition standpoint, long grain rough rice is defined as rough rice that contains greater than 25% of whole kernels. So that is the rule of thumb. But then after milling to a well-milled degree, it should contain not more than 10% of whole or broken kernels of medium or short grain rice. For medium grain definition, again, the rule of thumb is that it must contain more than 25% of whole kernels. Again, after milling these samples to a well-milled degree, it should contain not more than 10% of whole or large broken kernels of long grain rice or whole kernels of short grain rice. And then short grain rough rice, from a definition standpoint, again, it must contain 25% or more of whole kernels. And then after milling of such a sample to a well-milled degree, it should contain not more than 10% of whole or large broken kernels of long grain rice or whole kernels of medium grain rice. And now we have a mixed rough rice. This is typically a mixture of either of those classes that we have talked about. But again, by the rule of thumb, this should contain 25% of whole kernels. Then after milling to a well-milled degree, should contain more than 10% of other types of kernels. And other types of kernels have a variety of definitions. As we would say, this would be whole kernels of long grain rice in medium or short grain, or they could be whole kernels of medium grain rice in long or short grain rice. There could be whole grain kernels of short grain rice in long or medium grain rice, or large broken kernels of long grain rice in medium or short grain rice, and large broken kernels of medium or short grain rice in long grain rice. Now, I want to talk about a few defects of rough rice before we go into the standard grading systems here. The first defect I want to talk about that you will see in the grading chart is what we call immature kernels. You can see as rice develops on a panicle, you tend to have a distribution of maturity during the development of that panicle. And so the immature kernels are typically defined as those kernels that are not completely developed, and typically they are greenish kernels on the panicles. Often they have a moisture content that is greater than the average harvest moisture content. Typically, if you harvest rice at 22% moisture content, the immature kernels tend to have higher than that moisture content. They're typically weak in structure, and of course they tend to break during milling. And therefore, they are a significant source of reductions in head rice yields. When you mill those immature kernels, of course, this is what you'd see. You'd see some greenish kernels within the brown rice, and when you mill it further, they tend to be green compared to the other mature kernels. I want to define another defect that you'd see in a grading standard for rough rice, and this is the red rice. Now, red rice are typically rice of the same genus and species as white rice, but characterized by red seeds. As you can see in that figure there, the coat is red, and sometimes the coat may not necessarily be red, but the kernels inside could be red. Now, the hull may be black, it could be red or straw-colored, and typically from a grading standard standpoint, they are considered as a noxious weed due to the discoloration that they provide to the white or brown rice. Now, there's another definition, seeds or heat-damaged kernels as defined in grading standards. Seeds basically are whole or broken seeds of any plant other than rice. As you would imagine, when you harvest rice, you would have other seeds growing in the field, and those seeds typically, from a grading standpoint, they are classified as seeds and not rice whole kernels. Now, heat-damaged kernels tend to be reddish brown to orange color and are substantially darker than majority of the grain, and this figure here illustrates a heat-damaged kernel. And the defect may occur either in white or in parboiled rice. And so that therefore brings us to now a table that gives us the grade and grade requirement for various classes of rough rice. Based on this table here, you can see we have several grades from grade 1 all the way to grade number 6. And these grades are based on various matrices, the maximum limits of various indices, some of which we have discussed. For example, the seeds that could be in that sample lot, the heat-damaged kernels that could be in that sample lot, the red rice that could be in that sample lot, the chalky kernels. And again, when it comes to chalky kernels, we have to define that either for long grain or medium grain, because those two are disposed to have chalkiness to different degrees. Then there are other types, and then there are other color requirements. And so, for instance, if you look at US grade number 1, which is the highest grade there, we are allowed to have a maximum of only 4 seeds in 500 grams of a sample lot total, and about 3 heat-damaged kernels or objectionable seeds in 500 grams of a sample. And red rice, 0.5 from a percentage standpoint. And again, when you look at the chalkiness, you see we are only allowed to have 1% of kernels being chalky for long grain rice and 2% in case it is medium grain rice. And so this kind of table helps us to classify the grade of any rice lot. Next, we want to define brown rice. We talked about rough rice, now we want to talk about brown rice, and that is rice after removing the hull. By definition, this is rice which consists more than 50% of kernels of brown rice and which is intended for processing to mill rice. That's the definition. And again, we have 4 classes of brown rice for processing. The first class is long grain brown rice, medium grain brown rice, second, third, short grain brown rice, fourth, mixed brown rice. Again, for purposes of standard classes, these are based on the percentage of whole kernels or broken kernels and other types of rice. And again, by definition, the classes for brown rice, we say that is rice that has got 25% of whole kernels of brown rice and not more than 10% of whole or broken kernels of medium or short grain. The other class would be medium grain brown rice. Again, that would consist of 25% of whole kernels of brown rice and not more than 10% of whole or broken kernels of long grain rice or whole kernels of short grain rice. The short grain brown rice would be that rice that has 25% of whole kernels or brown rice and not more than 10% of whole or broken kernels of long grain rice or whole kernels of medium grain rice. And the mixed brown rice would be that rice that consists of 25% or more of whole kernels of brown rice and more than 10% of other types of rice classification. Now, there are special grades that we would like to mention here. There are special grades, they have special grade requirements and have special designations. For instance, parboiled rice, this is completely different. It has starch that has been generalized by soaking, steaming, and drying. we also have Smarty rice. This typically contains 3% of Smarty kernels. And then we have glutinous, which is a special variety of rice. It has about 50% of chalky kernels. Now then we have the other class, which is aromatic rice. These have a distinct and characteristic aroma. For example, we are familiar with the basmati or the jasmine. So these are special grade type of rice that have special requirements that might not be falling within the tables that we have just seen earlier. And so this table here kind of summarizes to us the grade requirements for classes of brown rice for processing. Again, we have about 5 grades there, from grade 1 all the way to grade 5. And they are again based on various matrices that we have described: the paddy kernels, percentages of that, and the number in 500 grams. We have seeds and heat damaged kernels. We have red rice, damaged and undamaged kernels. We have chalky kernels, broken kernels. Again, when it comes to broken kernels, there are different approaches to this based on whether it's a southern cultivation or western cultivation. So we have one case using 6-plate and one case using a 6.5-inch sieve to remove those broken kernels. And then we have, for this kind of table, we also have well-milled kernels as one of those criteria that is used to define the grade standards. Now let's look, for example, US grade number 1. In that case, it's the highest grade for brown rice, and we expect not really to have paddy kernels inside there. Now we are allowed to have about 20 kernels in 500 grams. We are allowed to have about 10 kernels that are seeds or heat damage in about 500 grams. We are allowed to have maybe 1 heat damaged kernel in 500 grams. You can see we are allowed to have 1% of red rice and so forth, 2% of chalky kernels in that grade number 1, and we are also allowed to have 1% of broken kernels. For a well-milled kernel, we are supposed to have about 1% of well-milled kernels. And you can see that as the grades increase, you can have more percentages of well-milled kernels. So this kind of summarizes the classifications or the grade standards for brown rice for processing. That moves us to the next category, which is classes of milled rice. Again, we have 4 major classes here: long grain milled rice, medium grain milled rice, short grain milled rice, and then you have mixed milled rice. Again, these are also having an additional classification, which is based on the percentage of whole kernels and brokens of different sizes. So under this category, we also have what we call the second head milled rice. We have screening milled rice, and then we have brewer's rice. And we are going to define what each of these means in the next set of slides. And so again, from a definition standpoint, for long grain milled rice, this will be rice that contains 25% of whole kernels of milled rice. Now in US number 1 all the way to number 4, we should have not more than 10% of whole or broken kernels of medium or short grain. And in US number 5 and number 6 grades, we should have not more than 10% of whole kernels of medium or short grain milled rice, and broken kernels do not apply in this case. Now, from medium grain milled rice standpoint, we should have 25% of whole kernels of milled rice. And in this case, in US number 1 through grade 4, we should not have more than 10% of whole or broken kernels of long grain rice or whole kernels of short grain rice. In US number 5 and number 6, we should not have more than 10% of whole kernels of long or short grain milled rice kernels. Now, milled rice, short grain milled rice would be that rice that contains 25% of whole kernels of milled rice, and in US number 1 through number 4, not more than 10% of whole or broken kernels of long grain rice or whole kernels of medium grain rice. Now in US number 5 or 6, they should not have more than 10% of whole kernels of long or medium grain meal rice kernels. Mixed meal rice, again, this should not have should have 25% or more of whole kernels of meal rice and more than 10% of other types. In this category, in US, number 5 or 6, mixed meal rice should contain more than 10% of whole kernels of other types. Broken kernels do not apply in this case. Now, I want to describe what second head mean under this category. Again, the definition of second head is based on southern or western production systems. And in case of southern production system, second head should have less than 25% of whole kernels, less than 7% of broken kernels removed by a 6-plate, less than 0.4% of broken kernels removed by a number 5-plate, and less than 0.05% of broken kernels passing through a 4 sieve. In Western production, the definition is slightly different. It should have less than 25% of whole kernels, less than 50% of broken kernels passing through a 6.5 sieve, and less than 10% of broken kernels passing through number 6 sieve. Now, screenings from a gain description standpoint or standard standpoint, again, is also based on southern or western production. For southern production systems, again, screenings should be those meal rice kernels that are less than 25% of whole kernels, 10% of broken kernels removed by a number 5 plate, 0.2% of broken kernels passing through number 4 sieve. And for western production, less than 25% of whole kernels, less than 15% of broken kernels passing through a 5.5 sieve, and greater than 50% of broken kernels passing through 6.5 sieve, and greater than 10% of broken kernels passing through number 6 sieve. Brewers, again, are some of those that found during the milling process. And again, by definition, from a standard standpoint, they should contain not more than 25% of whole kernels, and which do not meet the kernel size requirement for second head meal rice or screenings. Well milled rice kernels, these are whole broken kernels of rice from which the hulls and practically all of the germ and the bran layers have been removed. Now, there are a few other defects that we tend to find in milled rice kernels that you'll see on the grading standard, and one of those is chalkiness, and this figure here shows you an image of a chalky kernels. These appear as opaque portions of a kernel and can make up sometimes the entire kernel or sometimes just portions of the kernel. The chalky kernels tend to be brittle, and they tend to be chalky because of the loose packing of starch granules within those grains. And because of those loose packings of the starch, typically these grains tend to be weaker and very, very more susceptible to breaking. And as you can see, there are various portions within which that chalky kernels can be displayed within the rice kernels. Now, then there's the other part that you'll also see in the standard, that is the other defect, which is broken kernels. Again, as we've seen in previous slides or in previous modules, these are rice fragments less than 3/4 of the length of a whole milled rice kernel. As you can see in those figures, you can have that rice breaking in different sections on the tips to still remain as a whole kernel by definition. And then we have what we call pecky rice. These are basically characterized by brown to black discoloration of the whole kernels or other portions of the kernels. Most of the time, this results in a lot of yield reductions and also decrease in quality. On this figure, you can see a number of damaged or pecky kernels, and then on the bottom there, you can see non-damaged brown grains. There are a myriad of other defects that we can also see in rice when it has been milled. We have images there of kernel smut, immature kernels. Sometimes rice gets stained because of microbial infestations. Sometimes they get stained because of stink bug kind of attack, and all this play in reducing the grades of our rice. Now, this chart here summarizes the milled rice grades. As you could see, we have grades ranging from number 1 all the way to number 6. Again, various matrices are used that we have described before: seeds, And heat damage kernels is one of those metrics. We have chalkiness, we also have broken kernels, we have other types, and then we have color requirements. Now, for various grades, we have descriptions of the milling, of minimum milling requirements. For example, if you look at US grade number 1, which is the highest grade, we are allowed to have not more than 2 seeds and heat damage kernels in 500 grams. And if you look at, for example, broken rice percentage, we are not supposed to exceed 4% of broken rice kernels in a sample. Now, compared to grade number 6, we can have 50% of broken rice kernels in that sample for that rice to be classified as grade number 6. And again, these comparisons are done after those samples have been milled to what we call a well-milled degree of milling. And so this chart here helps us to summarize some of the various grades for classifying our samples when they have been milled. And with that, I want to leave you with some references that you can look at and get a little bit more information on some of the information that I've described in passing. And I want to say thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to talking to you in the next set of modules.